Few games could say they had over 15 different releases across their initial shelf life. In fact, the only one I can think of is MechWarrior 2. The game originally launched on store shelves in 1995 for MS-DOS, running in a software renderer before being bundled with all sorts of packages and having special versions made for 3D accelerators. Today, however, we'll be focusing on one specific version of the game, MechWarrior 2 The Titanium Trilogy, a compilation of all free games with the MechWarrior 2 name. In this video, I'm going to talk about as much as the history of the game as I can before comparing it to the two other retail versions of the game. Let's get started. Our story begins in 1989 with the release of the original MechWarrior. Developed primarily for MS-DOS, it was developed by Dynamics and published by Activision. Despite the game having decent success, the license Dynamics had to use the Battlepack universe, of which MechWarrior is based upon, only lasted for one game, and FASA didn't seem interested in renewing it. Activision was next in line to get a license to Battletech, and after acquiring it, they began work on MechWarrior 2 The Clans. This original version of the game struggled to get through development as staff was departing all the time, and the marketing department was far too happy to promote a game that wasn't even close to being finished. FASA was fed up with this and decided to take the Battletech license away from Activision. Despite this, however, they still had the ability to produce games so as long as they were branded with MechWarrior 2, so development continued. As the original team had been entirely replaced by new staff, the game was slowly altered over the course of 1994 up until the game released in 1995. This resulted in what we now know as MechWarrior 2 31st Century Combat. The game won numerous awards for its gameplay, the soundtrack scored by G.N. Wang, and the impressive 3D rendered graphics. The game was a gigantic success economically as well, likely because of how aggressive Activision was with getting the game out there. Just about every 3D accelerator chipset of the time had its own version of the game, barring the NVIDIA NV1 and the rendition Verite, and Activision made sure to bundle the vanilla game with things like joysticks and game bundle packages. 2 months after the initial release, MechWarrior 2 received an expansion pack in the form of Ghost Bear's Legacy, which got positive reviews from critics. Activision kept pushing onward with the license by releasing MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries, which was buggy but was being slowly patched over time. In late 1996, Activision started work on the MechWarrior 2 Battlepack, a compilation of MechWarrior 2 and Ghost Bear's Legacy. It was a simple project that ported the games over to the new Mercenaries engine, added higher resolution textures, changed a few parts of the game's balancing, and added new music to Ghost Bear's Legacy to replace some of the tracks that it reused from the original MechWarrior 2. This new music was made by James Chico May, who was not paid for his work on Battlepack, likely because it was a cheap and simple budget project. Soon after the release of Battlepack, however, a new MechWarrior 2 product was announced to the public when Dave Georgeson, one of the lead developers for the Mercenaries 1.1 patch and Battlepack, posted this to a thread on the Alt Games MechWarrior 2 Usenet board.
Howdy folks, I'm Dave Georgeson. I'm the producer at Activision that is handling the Mercenaries patch version 1.1, the Mercenaries Gold product, and the MechWarrior 2 Gold product. I can say that you will be blown away by the graphics improvements and net enhancements. And yes, Mercs and Mech 2 and Ghost Bear's Legacy will be Direct 3D capable. More later.
The MechWarrior 2 Gold product would turn into Battlepack Gold for a short period of time, but 3 weeks after the initial post on April 23rd, Dave posted again stating that the games had been renamed to Titanium because of the marketing team. Activision revealed that this would be released in fall 1997. Between April and fall 1997, Dave had told a number of things to the public about the product. The earliest of these was that people who purchased Battlepack would be offered an inexpensive, roughly $15 upgrade CD-ROM that would allow them to get access to the features of the Titanium Trilogy without purchasing the full trilogy. When asked about the storage optimization of the games, Dave said that Titanium would be released on 4 CD-ROMs. 3 of these would be for the game's individual content, and the 4th would contain common files shared between them. This way the consumer could install all 3 games without using any duplicate files, which would trim down the size of the package to 120 megabytes, assuming you chose not to install any movies or sounds. There was also a number of multiplayer features that were said to be added, such as dynamic game joining and matchmaking. Something important to note is that during all this, Activision was incredibly busy. There were 11 separate teams, all working on a variety of projects, including Dark Reign, Battlezone, Hyperblade, Mercenaries 1.1, Heavy Gear, Interstate 76, and various others, all while Titanium was being developed. When talking to Dave about this in Twitter DMs, he described the Titanium team as definitely a sideshow. But because of how stretched thin Activision was, Titanium had a very meager amount of staff and a budget of less than $300,000. Dave Jordison and a few artists were the only in-house contributors to the project. There was no dedicated sound team and no dedicated programmers, so the only changes that could be made to the code were very basic tweaks. And also due to how short-staffed Titanium was, Monolith Productions was hired out to provide additional help on the project by working with the network code, helping with the 3DFX Voodoo graphics support, which Activision staff had struggled with in the beginning as none of them had tried to program for it before, and optimizing performance, which included updating the game to use floating point math rather than integer-based math. Aside from product announcements from Activision and info about Titanium being repeated by Activision staff, not much happened until August. In that month, some new news came out about Titanium. It would not be coming out during fall. The new expected date for Titanium, according to Activision, was February 1998 at best. Although information about the delay was kept quiet, the reason for it was due to issues with development, in particular the artwork. The art was redone numerous times as the staff wasn't satisfied with it, and because there were so few artists working on the project, it took a long time to remake it, continually pushing back development. Additionally, Titanium was sharing content and staff members with the upcoming Mercenaries 1.1 patch, which only further pushed both projects back. After a few months of no news, February rolls around and something is finally revealed. In addition to the new release date of the game being sometime in March, a step up from the non-specific date of spring 1998 given on the webpage for Titanium, Activision had forgone the upgrade CD that had been mentioned numerous times and stated on the MechWarrior 2 board that if you send in a CD for either MechWarrior 2 or Mercenaries, then you'll get a $15 rebate. If you send in both, then you'll get a $25 rebate, and since Titanium was set to cost $45, this would put the total cost down to $20. This rebate excluded hardware and promotional copies of the game and the Ghost Bears Legacy expansion pack. This made a number of people furious. While one could rationalize the hardware and promo versions of the game not being included, as those were often given away for free, not including Ghost Bears Legacy seemed like a rather insulting move considering it was sold at retail and was included with Titanium. On top of all this, people are growing weary about the quality of Titanium and Activision as a whole. Hype around the product slowed to a crawl until eventually Titanium was released on March 31st, 1998. It was a bomb. Fans were disappointed and angry. There were no new features, and performance was worse than the software-rendered DOS and Windows 95 versions, which didn't make sense as 3D accelerators were supposed to speed games up, and they had also switched to floating point math, which was supposed to make things even faster. There were also a large number of bugs, including poor hit detection for missile weapons and overheating now being impossible. On top of this, the game's launch was very quiet. Despite all the hype, Activision had nothing to say about the game at this point, and the only review was one by PC Power Play Australia in July 1998, 3 months after the game launched in the US. The final statement about the game was given by Activision's J. Tyler Scott, who was credited as the producer for the project in the game's credits and joined late into the project when things were being wrapped up, likely to help with Q&A and marketing. There are a few things you should know. I am given a specific amount of time and a specific amount of money to do my job. When either of these two things are gone, I have two choices: kill the project or release what I have. In the case of Titanium, I chose to release what I had with an attempt at letting everyone know what I was providing. Thus, the story of Titanium ends. It was, along with the rest of the MechWarrior 2 series, removed from Activision's website at some point between 1998 and 1999, and they would never speak of it again. The lack of publicity, plus the upcoming swarm of Activision titles, meant that it would soon be forgotten by just about everybody. At the end of the day, however, a product was still released, and now it's time to take a look at it. The original MechWarrior 2 series has what I argue are some of the most appealing and standout PC boxes released in the 1990s. All of the games feature a two-tone box, with one side being yellow and orange fire for 31st Century Combat, a blue and white icy glacier for Ghost Bears Legacy, or a blood red sky for Mercenaries, and the other side being black for the versions of the game that included DOS executables, and an odd shade of brown for the Pentium or Windows 95 only versions. On every game, a glossy mech towers over the box with the texture of it being ever so slightly raised from the rest. All of this combined to make them feel high quality and incredibly pleasing to look at and hold. The insides of the boxes weren't slacking either, with the original releases featuring tons of goodies, advertisements, and fancy manuals. Titanium's box is a bit different from the other Mech 2 boxes, but it's still a looker in its own ways. The games are all highlighted behind a black backdrop, with a blurb on the side that shows off how different the original games and these new 3D accelerated versions look. Sadly, the inside of the box isn't as interesting as the original releases. The manuals that attempted to stay at least somewhat in character with the game have been replaced with a condensed manual that combines information about all 3 titles in a flat and boring manner. And the reference card is just the Mercenaries reference card with a change of name and new screenshots. The game also originally came with a $25 rebate for owners of Mech 2 and Mercs, along with an advertisement for Battlepack, but my copy didn't come with either of those and there's no scans online, so I can't comment on them. I would say the best thing about the Titanium box set is the new look of the CDs. The labels from them are printed on a fantastic silver color with all the company logos in red. While they're different from the other Mech 2 discs, they're still incredibly appealing and nice to look at. When you insert any one of the games into your computer to install them, you get greeted by a customized installer with neat artwork and a low quality mono wave file of one of the tracks from the game, a step up from the generic installer with MIDI music used in the original titles. Once you start the game, however, things are identical to the originals. Titanium's most notable and marketed change are the new graphics. The original MechWarrior 2 sparsely used textures, instead preferring to use gradients in environments that were primarily flat and untextured, likely to make the game run faster and with more efficiency, and considering how revolutionary and impressive the game looked without textures, it was more than acceptable. In 1996, however, Mercenaries came out and added low-resolution, 64x64 textures with 256 bits of color to parts of the game, with Battlepack following suit and adding practically the same set of textures to all of the missions in 31st Century Combat and Ghostbear's Legacy. Because these were rendered in software, there was no texture filtering to speak of. Titanium once again ups the ante, now offering higher resolution 128x128 textures with 16-bit color depth and bilinear texture filtering. This new set of textures is a radical departure from how the games looked in the past. Because Titanium is based off of Battlepack, which in turn uses the Mercenaries engine as a base, all of the effects from that have been carried over, including explosion smoke trails and dynamic lighting. Both of these have been updated for Titanium. Smoke trails are now denser and less pixelated, and the dynamic lighting is now colored. Performance, however, has taken a major hit from the DOS and Windows 95 originals. On a Pentium 2 300MHz with a 16MB Voodoo-free 3000, a system that far exceeds the minimum requirements of a Pentium 133 with a 2MB 3D accelerator, the game constantly slows down whenever action is occurring, with smoke trails being the biggest culprit. Even on modern hardware like an i7 4770K with a GeForce GTX 1070 running the game using N-Glide, the performance comes to a crawl whenever a large amount of smoke trails appear, ranging from a drop to 40 frames per second all the way down to 20 depending on how many are on screen. On a topic of graphical effects, one thing that Titanium has is fog. Unfortunately, it seems the effects weren't finished being implemented. While majority of Mercenaries has working fog, 31st Century Combat and Ghostbear's Legacy only have it for a select few missions. In the case of Ghostbear's Legacy, the fog does a poor job at hiding the severe pop-in the games suffer from. Similar to other Windows versions of the game, the resolution is capped out at 640x480, and due to a bug in the programming that was also in Battlepack, there's no way to run the game at the lower 320x200 setting in the options. It's worth noting that there is one mission that can glitch out and run in the otherwise unavailable 320x200 mode in Battlepack, which gives a glance at what this low resolution mode would have looked like with the new textures. It's not very pretty, and the game also doesn't run much better than it did at 640x480. Additionally, just like Battlepack, the graphics menu in the shell does not work correctly, and any changes you make in it will not apply in-game. The only way to change graphics settings is to use the in-game menu, which is sparse on options, only allowing you to disable lighting, shadows, chunks from explosions, and smoke trails. One thing that has not been changed since the original versions of the games are the models. Rather than use the models from the 3D accelerated versions, which typically had a higher polygon count, or even make models exclusively for Titanium, the models here are simply the original ones with new textures slathered onto them. There's also an important graphics effect missing from Titanium, wireframes. These were removed from Mercenaries for unknown reasons, but were added back into Battlepack. I'm not sure why they're not present here. I have heard before it had to do with difficulties getting it to work with the 3D accelerated graphics, but the engine was clearly still capable of doing the wireframe effect even when accelerated, as proven by Heavy Gear, which launched before Titanium. It's also worth noting that the infrared vision mode is broken in Titanium and does not work as intended. Regarding gameplay, Titanium has gotten a lot of flack from fans for its changes to how weapons function. Many of the weapons were rebalanced, and as a result, the game is often absurdly easy. One of the changes that fans have complained about the most is that the medium pulse laser is overpowered and often capable of destroying a mech in under a few seconds, although this change actually originated from Battlepack, and it's the only change to originate from that as far as I can tell. According to Dave, the reason Titanium was even further changed is because people wrote in to complain about the weapons not being closer to their tabletop counterparts, and as a result, he changed as much as he could. Unfortunately, a lot of the weapon values and data were too complex of code to change without a dedicated lead programmer on Activision's side. Possibly as a result of Titanium being partially changed to use floating point math, new glitches were introduced into the gameplay. Hit detection in general seems to be worse, but LRMs and PPCs appear to have the most issues with them, often failing to do damage on impact. One bizarre, although be it much friendlier glitch, is that slow projectile weapons such as the Arrow 4 and PPC may teleport to their destination as soon as they're fired. PPCs typically do no damage when this happens, but the Arrow 4 will usually behave as normal, which makes it an even more overpowered weapon than before. There's also a few glitches related to heat generation. The most important is that it's no longer possible to die of overheating, in a typical gameplay scenario. A myth that has gone around for a long time about Titanium is that it's impossible to overheat and destroy your mech, which is only partially true. If you're running the game on a modern CPU, then it seems to be impossible to explode no matter what you do, but on period correct hardware like the aforementioned Pentium 2 300MHz, you can overheat through sustained fire of high heat weapons for a long time. The fastest I was able to destroy a mech was in 10 seconds by firing 10 medium pulse lasers at the same time in a mech with no heat sinks. In a typical gameplay scenario, however, you would not be generating that much heat at that speed, so in practice, overheating is just simply not possible. There's also some leftovers in the original game from being based on the Mercenaries engine. Using MechVM, 31st Century can be launched with the compatible Ghostbear's Legacy shell, with the simulator still being the normal MechWarrior 31st Century Titanium engine. Inside of the shell, it's possible to use a preset of the Rifleman that carries an Arrow 4 missile launcher, and going into the game reveals that this missile launcher is still fully working. The audio for Battlepack made it out with only a few problems, although Titanium still shares these issues. On 31st Century Combat, tracks 20 through 27 have been removed to make way for the two separate versions of the game, both of which are larger than any prior retail version, and most of the remaining tracks are shorter in length. There is an odd issue with Battlepack, however, where the final track on the disc is corrupted and only plays 4 seconds of static. This was fixed for Titanium. Something bizarre, however, is that many of the tracks have been reshuffled. For example, track 16 on the original game was No Surrender. On Battlepack in Titanium, this has been moved to track 10. Every mission in the game still refers to the original track numbers, however, internally, which results in almost every mission having the wrong music track playing. Ghostbear's Legacy has seen less losses, with only 3 music tracks missing, but just like 31st Century Combat, some of the remaining music is shorter in length than before. More important, however, is that, as mentioned in the history segment, some of the music has been replaced with new tracks by James Chico May. The tracks that have been replaced are Track 4, Searching Forever, Track 10, Underwater Run, Track 11, Search and Destroy, Track 12, Ghostbear 12, and Track 14, Jungle Jive. Tracks 13 and 15 were repeats in the original DOS game, but in Battlepack and Titanium, the tracks have been changed to different repeats from the DOS game. Mercenaries was the one that made it out with the least changes, only suffering from having shorter music. All 21 tracks from the DOS game are here and accounted for. Unfortunately, one of the worst bugs that plagues every Windows version of the game has not been fixed in either Battlepack or Titanium. If you pause and unpause the game, the CD track that's being played stops being played, and instead, track 1 of the currently inserted disc plays in its place. There's also some odd quirks, such as how on the start of a mission in 31st Century Combat in Ghostbear's Legacy, the game will always play the startup line from Mercenaries before following it up with the correct startup line. There is also a plethora of unused audio content in the MW2.PRJ files for those two games, including all of the mission dialogue from Mercenaries. It should be obvious by now as to why Titanium receives so much flack from fans. The missing features, buggy gameplay, outdated graphics, and undelivered promises from Activision left fans sour back in the 90s, and many are still unhappy to this day. I personally found it enjoyable to play and look back upon it, but I must admit that if I had to pay $45 for this package, I would have felt very disappointed in Activision.